On the channel, I already have a little mini-series where I take a retrospective look at the history of different horological brands. I've got a video for Seiko up on the channel there as part of that series if you wanted to learn a little more about them. But in the process of researching that video, I read up on the Seiko Museum, which is located near the famous Seiko clock tower building in central Ginza, which is where their flagship store is also based. Now, I don't want this video to simply be a recreation of that retrospective that I've already made. So instead, it's going to focus on what I learnt from my visit and information for you if you're thinking about making the trip yourself. With all that said, let's get into the video. First of all, in terms of getting to the museum, assuming that you're already in Japan, of course, this really should be the least of your concerns. The Japanese public transport network is world famous, and the boom in the tourism industry in recent years means that a lot more of the signage is mirrored in English. Unlike South Korea, Google Maps is fully functional in Japan, and their internet is like lightning, so it's pretty difficult to get lost, and the language barrier isn't really there anymore. One thing that I would say though is to be respectful. Unfortunately, that boom in tourism has also seen a slight erosion in terms of public restraint and decency. As for the museum itself, it is free to visit, but you will be asked if you've made a reservation in advance on entry, and at peak hours, if you haven't, I would assume that you would be turned away. The building itself is fairly compact and unfortunately very awkward to navigate. There is only one lift and no stairs, and while the museum itself is split across 6 floors, there are Seiko offices above that the lift also services. Navigating from one floor to the next therefore becomes a far more painful process than it might need be, but when the admission is free, it is pretty hard to complain. What it does mean though is that an experience that really wouldn't take an hour at a leisurely pace can involve a large amount of extra waiting about. If you were tempted to buy a book on the history of the company in the gift shop, I'd advise buying it before you enter and not at the end, so you've got some lift waiting entertainment. Each of the floors has a specific focus to it, and I'll go through each of them in a moment as a way of structuring the video, but I would say that my strategy of starting at the top and working your way down seemed to be easier with the lift situation than working your way up. The top floor of the museum focuses on the different approaches Seiko takes towards telling the time. There is a section dedicated to their pursuit of accuracy, another that focuses on aesthetic beauty, one that focuses on Grand Seiko and their focus on quality, and finally a section on the efforts that Seiko have made over the years to get children interested and involved in the process of telling the time. Beneath that sits a floor dedicated to the development of the company itself, from its start as Sakosha making wall clocks in 1892, their expansion into the international market, and it culminates with their development of the Astron in 1969. Arguably the most impactful watch ever made, the world's first quartz piece. The third floor is about the history of time telling itself, with the displays showcasing time telling devices from across all of recorded human history, starting with ancient sundials and water clocks through to the development of mechanical time telling in the form of larger clocks. It was quite interesting to see how Japanese clocks were adjustable, allowing for time to effectively be sped up or slowed down based on the seasonal time system employed in the country during the Edo period. The second floor focuses on the personal history of Seiko's founder, Kintaro Hattori, a man who had an undeniable impact on the Japanese and indeed global timepiece industry. The far wall of the floor has a genealogy of the company, tracing its line management from inception through to modern day. The ground floor houses the reception, gift shop, and the outside features a giant pendulum clock standing at almost 6 meters in height. Finally, in the basement is a small exhibition dedicated to Seiko's developments in terms of exploration and timekeeping for sporting events. I won't lie to you, I am not usually a huge fan of museums unless they are something I am really interested in. For me, the pleasure of visiting Ginza was seeing models I'd read about many times before and getting an opportunity to see them in person. I also really enjoyed learning about ancient timekeeping. It's easy to dismiss a sundial or a water clock as very primitive, but if you look at the entirety of human history, they have been around for many thousands of years more than even the oldest of wristwatches. Water clocks in particular are really quite fascinating to me, as I can't say that I've ever actually seen one before. If my garden wasn't such a disorganised mess, I think one would make for a really nice feature. On the subject of being a bit of a disorganised mess, I do think I could have filmed a little more and perhaps sequenced this video a little better. But when you're sat frantically editing on Christmas Eve, thousands of miles away from your subject material, I think hindsight can end up being a little bit of a kicker. Something that was a particular pleasure for me to see was indeed the previously mentioned Astron. I've lost count of the number of times it's come up in discussion in my videos, but have never actually seen one in person before. It's a real turning point in horological history, but it was striking to me how the design language of their dress watches had developed from their award-winning chronometer models. That flat-bodied all-gold watch is actually really aesthetically pleasing, and the recessed crown is something that I don't think we see enough of in modern watches. A fair few now try to hide the crown at 4 o'clock, but I think this is a far nicer solution. The geek in me also really likes seeing the technological achievements of the brand, in particular the wrist computer system and the TV watch. Again, models that I've talked about at length on the channel, but haven't seen in person, in this case for a very long time. Having said that, after seeing everything in person, I can't help but feel a pang of regret that I don't actually get to experience them properly. I have found myself looking at them longingly on eBay ever since the visit, and the last thing I need at this point is further encouragement on that front. As Seiko have made a modern edition of their first watch, the Laurel, and indeed an updated version of the Astron, I can't help but wonder if they will get around to delving into their digital back catalogue for inspiration in the near future. One final thing I would say is that you really have to be interested in horological history to get a full appreciation of the museum. The friend I was travelling with isn't that interested in watches, and I can categorically tell you he would have hated the experience if I dragged him in with me. If you just want to look at some nice watches, you'd be far better served taking a walk through Ginza's famous upmarket shopping district. The Seiko store itself is particularly impressive if you want to do some window or indeed actual shopping. With that being said, as a watch nerd, I love the experience. I can't say I've been anywhere like it before, but that got me thinking. I doubt Seiko are the only brand with their own museum, but I've never looked into the existence of any others. Hopefully that is where you can come in and help me. If you can tell me about any other watch museums or sites of horological interest that you've personally visited or know of, please let me know in the comments section below. As ever, thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed what you've seen or found it informative, consider dropping the video a like and subscribing for more content like this in future.